Okay, so I'm assuming that all is well in AJ's capable hands and you can all hear me. So first of all, yes, I'm really sorry not to be present at Synod today, as is Jean. And I'm very grateful to the moderator, the Synod clerk, and to AJ, who has done the wizardry to help me to do this remotely. If I seem to be looking in all the wrong places, wrong directions while I'm doing this, I haven't got a lectern in front of me, and it's all a bit of a last-minute rush job. So please forgive me if the eye contact doesn't seem very good. I have to say I'm a little bit bemused about being on the platform, albeit virtually. I'm aware I must be speaking to a large number of very experienced pastoral workers. And it feels a little strange that I've been asked to address you on that subject. It always feels strange to me that I'm asked to speak on this subject. The only reason I can suggest is that I think perhaps it's because my varied background in this area might have given me the chance to look at this from a number of different angles, not all of which are open to every pastoral worker. To outline that very briefly, I began as a teacher in a particular specialist role with a clear pastoral dimension to it. Sorry, I've lost my place already. Yeah, here we are. Since then, my experience has been as a church minister, a senior NHS mental health chaplain, and a trained counsellor. And that has enabled me to make connections between those different disciplines, not least with scripture, more on which at the end. Maybe that's why I'm here. But before I start trying quite possibly to teach a number of grandmothers to suck eggs, I do want to say that I enormously respect the length, breadth and depth of experience that must be assembled at Synod. So that said, let's get started. The next slide, please, AJ. Thank you. I'm calling this an other-centered approach. It may seem too obvious to need saying, but all pastoral work is about relationships. And this quotation on the screen goes to the heart of what that means. I can be in true relation only if I respect the otherness of the other. Again, it sounds obvious, but too often in my own experience anyway, our first instinct is not other but self-centered. What am I going to say? We must all have been asking that question so many times. So our first task is to acknowledge and deal with that so that we can focus our attention on the other person. I wonder how many of you remember being taught this. Have the next slide, please. The Green Cross Code. Before stepping off the pavement, stop, look, excuse me, listen. So here's the Green Cross Code for pastoral care. First, the next slide, please, AJ. Stop. Stop searching inside ourselves for the words. If I'm preoccupied with finding my words, then by definition, my attention is on me. For all the best reasons, perhaps, but nonetheless, it's a self rather than other-centered approach. I need to ask myself why I'm doing it. Is it to cover my feelings of inadequacy? Very probably. We all know the expression of sticky silence, and most of us don't like them. So we too easily find ourselves trying to find words to fill them with. And that is not a good reason to speak. So stop. And the next slide, please. Look, by which I mean focus. I need to tear my attention away from myself and focus on the other person. What the other person needs is not my words, it's my presence. There's a lot of healing power in a good presence, in our willingness simply to be there with people. My wife and I have never forgotten, and will never forget, the minister who sat with us after our only child died in an accident. We later heard from an elder that he had felt terrible. He felt a failure because he didn't have the words for us. He felt useless, embarrassed, impotent. But despite all of that, with all those feelings, he stayed there right through a very long night. I dare say he did find some words. He would not have been completely silent, I'm sure, but we can't remember a single one of them. What we do remember is his presence and the healing power of it. So it wasn't instant. We didn't find all the pain gone, but it set up the context for a healing process to begin. So we stop, we look, focus on the other, and then we're ready for the next stage and for the next slide. Listen. As we listen, we're beginning to find our way into the other person's world, their experience, their feelings, and that's where the right words will come from, when words are appropriate. We're thinking in terms of accurate listening, and I can give a few examples of that, and I hope will be helpful. But before I do, I just want to say a little more about the value of a silent listening presence. I'm remembering my experience with a client during my counselling training. I started off, frankly, wondering why she came to me. For most of the session, I just sat there. She would hardly let me get a word in edgeways. And people who know me will tell you that's not easy to do. The remarkable thing was, though, she had an uncanny way of preempting most of my interventions and saying just the very thing that I had been about to say, and sometimes in the same words. But I did notice that over the course of each session, she seemed to make a journey. There was something real happening that was beyond me to explain. But it happened too often to be coincidence. This phenomenon has been explored by therapists, including Dave Midlands, who coined the phrase, working at relational depth. I really can't begin to explain it, but it would seem that we were communicating at a very deep level. When the therapy ended, she thanked me very much for all my help. What help? I'd hardly uttered a word for the entire 50 minutes of every session. All she had was my presence. Just my presence. The point was she found the right words. Her words. It was very unusual. It didn't happen in that way with any other of my clients. I did have some who good-humouredly accused me of reading their minds. I wasn't, of course, but something was happening in the listening process that was more powerful than any simple logic or theory can explain. But I'm convinced that it was something to do with the quality of presence. And we must never, ever underestimate that. Most of us don't value ourselves enough to believe in that situation that just being there can be helpful. So let's get practical. The next slide, please. What this really is about is empathy. And the first thing to say about empathy is that it's not about our feelings towards somebody. I sometimes think I detect a popular misconception that empathy is sympathy on steroids. It's not. Empathy is a mental process, and quite a rigorous and disciplined one, that is very demanding for the listener. Godfrey Barrett Leonard describes it as on the screen, a form of inquiring and knowing, a caring but disciplined opening of self to the lived feelings of the other. Empathy is about making a connection with the other. So it's about focusing and listening. If I do that well, then yes, it's very likely I shall experience some very powerful feelings. And this is where I need to be very discerning, for the other's sake as well as my own. And the next slide, please. The critical difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is about me. Empathy is about the other. And I need to know which I'm experiencing at any given moment. I need to keep the feelings that I'm picking up in the other quite separate from my own. It doesn't help anyone if the therapist gets overwhelmed and ends up drowning alongside the other. But more than that, it's about respect. About respecting the other, not appropriating to myself feelings that are rightfully theirs. That's as disrespectful as it is dangerous. As Leonard said, a caring but disciplined opening of self to the lived feelings of the other. And that's much harder than it sounds. We need to know ourselves very well indeed to make that distinction. But it's that thing I quoted at the beginning. I can be in true relation only if I respect the otherness of the other. So how do we actually do this? Given the time constraints today, I'm going to touch very briefly on 4 ways we can be practically helpful. I mean, it does feel odd, talking to a computer screen. I'll do my best. It's very strange. I hadn't expected it to feel quite so strange as this. So, these techniques, I don't like calling them techniques, these responses work on at least 2 levels. Firstly, they demonstrate to the other person that we are listening, which is very affirming of them and their value. We must never underestimate the importance of that. Secondly, in the case of the last 3, they can help us to check out that we're getting the feelings right, that we are indeed finding the right words. So let's take a look at each of them in turn. Minimal encouragers. These are the things that we do every day in our ordinary conversations. The simple nods of affirmation, little grunts, aha, I see. Just simple indications that we're listening, but don't interrupt the flow, but encourage the other to continue. And then, next slide, please, AJ. No, you're on it, sorry. Paraphrasing. Saying what the other has just said, but using different words. There's an example up there on the screen. He never consults me about anything. Last week he bought a new car without a word to me. Doesn't think my opinion counts. In a simple paraphrase of that, you feel devalued when you make serious decisions without consulting you. That sends a clear signal to the other, I'm listening and I'm getting it. It also gives them the opportunity, if I am wrong, to correct me. But either way, they know I'm listening. And then we have reflecting. Reflecting is often confused with paraphrasing. People talk about paraphrasing and reflecting, but there's a vital difference. Here I might pick out just one word and reflect that exact word back to the other. In this example, the other says we're going to Blackpool next week. And I reflect back, Blackpool. I've sometimes called this the Clapham Junction of counselling. You can, or certainly you once could, in my dim and distant memory, go anywhere, just about anywhere, from Clapham Junction railway station. Similarly, the simple repetition of one word might bring a number of different replies from the other, each of which might lead us off in a different direction. For example, here we can see just 4 of many possible responses I might get from the other when I reflect back Blackpool. We used to go every year, but haven't been since the drowning accident. That's where I popped the question, romantic or what? Every blooming year we do it, I'd rather go to a Lake District. Well, yes, but it's next week. You can see that each of those gives me a lot more clarity about what's in the other's mind and sets the direction of the conversation. Clapham Junction. And then there's summarising. This can be really helpful if done well and not overused. Often, people come for help and their heads are full of all kinds of things, in a world, a lot of issues, chasing each other around, all manner of problems, fears, resentment. They can't focus on any of them, and they might feel quite overwhelmed, and there's far too much there to sort out. A simple summary can sometimes give clarity and relief. And like paraphrasing, this can be a good way of checking that I've got it right. If I have, it might help to clarify things for the other. If not, again, they can correct me. The example's on the screen, so I start off slightly tentatively. Would it be okay if I try and sum up what you've told me to make sure I'm getting it right? And then there are I've imagined three possible things that have come through to me as being the key issues for the other person. And I would always finish up with saying, is that summary fair? Am I on the right lines? Okay, so these are ways in which, by careful listening, we might find our way into the other's internal world, which is the definition of empathy, and begin to find their right words. And there's something else that we shouldn't be afraid of. And I think, to be honest, most of us, including me, tend to be afraid of it. I remember a moment in my training as a counsellor when a fellow student was very concerned about handling silence. After pressing the tutor for some time, she eventually said, "But what do you do when absolutely nothing is happening?" And the reply was, "It is impossible for two people to be in a room and nothing be happening." Sometimes silence can be a really good experience. Sometimes it can fill a real need for the other who lives in a chaotic world of noise and all kinds of stuff. But often, to be honest, it is difficult, especially in the early stages. And we shouldn't assume that the other person shares our feelings. Empathy again. It can help to bring that out into the open. Naming the elephant can relieve the tension and also, once again, allows the other to make some kind of response if they so wish. Simple sentence, "I'm aware we've gone rather quiet. I'm okay with that if you are. Just take the time you need." The client might say, "I'm not okay with that." But again, we're getting somewhere. But what we must never, ever underestimate. Next slide. The healing power of presence. You've probably all heard the saying, "Don't just do something, sit there." It's our being there that matters. And the worst mistake that inexperienced counsellors and pastoral companions make is undermining that presence with too many words. It has been estimated that maybe 90% of the interventions that new trainee counsellors make are redundant. And a large part of the training, certainly the training that I went through, was about helping us to hone that down and to know when to say something and when to keep silent. Well, I hope this has been helpful. I've tried to cover a lot of ground in a short time. I've scratched an awful lot of surfaces, and it may well be that some of you want to go into this more deeply. I hope you will. In which case, here comes a commercial. You might find it helpful to check out the book I wrote about this a few years ago. I had hoped to be here in person so that those who wanted to can get a copy from me. I purchased some copies from the publisher using my author discount, and I'd hoped to sell them today at the discount price of £10. It's $14.99 in bookshops. However you buy it, I need to tell you I don't gain financially. If you buy it at the full price, the royalties go to charity. If you're able to buy it from me, then you would pay me what I pay. I'll tell you that so you know I've got no ulterior motive for plugging this book. I wrote it because I believe passionately in what it says, and I want it to be read. That's my only motive. Perhaps you allow me to conclude by just saying a few words about it. Of all the books that I've written, this was the one that I wanted to write most. Over the years, I have become increasingly excited by the connections between pastoral care and counselling and Judeo-Christian spirituality. In fact, strangely enough, it was secular counselling training that helped me rediscover the Bible in vibrant new ways. Because of the connections We seem to have lost the slide, AJ. Am I right? Thank you. Strangely enough, it was secular counselling training that helped me rediscover the Bible in new ways because of the connections I was repeatedly finding. It was a very odd experience. I've never been anything near what is popularly called a Bible thumper. And yet, just as I was starting to look toward retirement from ministry, I was getting excited about the Bible. And it was all because of a completely secular diploma course in counselling and psychotherapy. I'm now convinced we miss whole layers of meaning in the Bible because we read it solely through very familiar religious filters. Actually, it's jam-packed with wonderful, timeless human wisdom, which is just too good to miss. And it was counselling training that started those bells ringing for me. The book begins by looking at ways of being present to people. The first 3 chapters are entirely about listening principles and counselling insights. Then there's a chapter on spirituality in general, and 5 chapters cross-referencing that with scripture and with theology and tradition. And the final chapter, the most important in many ways, is about good practice and keeping ourselves and others safe. I haven't seen this combination of counselling, theology and safeguarding in any other single book. There may be one out there, but I haven't seen it. Jan Berry reviewed it and called it the book I wish I'd written. You can buy it online from Kevin Mayhew, or you can find it on Amazon. Or if you could order it from me for a tenner plus postage. Retail price, let's say, is $14.99. Whichever you do, you won't be lining my pockets, but I'm confident you will find it helpful. Under the circumstances, I think the best I can suggest, if you're interested in it, I haven't checked this out with Jeffrey, but I'm sure he'll be cooperative. If you send an email to Synod, they can pass it on to me, and then I can contact you, we can take it from there. So if you want to buy a copy, it's yours for £10, so you can follow this up and do some more study and research on it.